I've seen a lot of the, people lobbing bombs from the wood side to the plastic to the wood,
Right.
and all those things. And we just kind of slide in between both of them going, hey, we think we got something that makes a difference.
Welcome to Alt Investing Made Easy, where we explore the complex world of alternative assets. I'm Roland, a securities attorney, investment advisor, and your co-host.
And I'm Sarah, an investment advisor and corporate attorney, and your other co-host. We'll guide you through real estate, private equity, and more, making complex topics accessible.
Tune in for insights that empower your financial journey.
Let's make alt investing easy, one episode at a time. Welcome everyone to Alt Investing Made Easy. Today we have a new friend with us, Lane Segerstrom. He's the CEO of Corn Board Manufacturing Incorporated. And he was introduced to us by another friend, Carl Melman, who we've been getting to know lately. And Lane has had a long career leading and growing companies in different industries. And today he'll share his experience with one of his current projects, which is this project for the company Corn Board Manufacturing. By the end of this episode, you will learn more about leadership from a very experienced business person. And also you'll learn more about the private equity investment opportunity that Lane has with his company. So Lane, welcome. We're really grateful you could join us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and share some of my experiences and maybe we'll encourage some other people to be able to do the same.
Great.
Yeah, welcome, Lane. And this is fun for us because so frequently we wind up talking about commercial real estate, in the alternative investment space. It takes up a big chunk of that. And there's a reason for that because of its relative safety. But your company is really unique, and we'll let you get into it more. But you're using corn stover. Stover is a new word that I learned through meeting you. Stover is the byproduct of all the corn production, the leftover bits of the plant that don't get consumed. You're going to tell us more about that, but you make essentially particle board, or I guess it's a wood alternative, and turning that into pallets. And so this is just so exciting for me because it's a really unique concept, and it's doubly exciting because of the success that your company is having. So maybe Lane, start out by just telling us some of your background leading into how you got into this current Corn Board Manufacturing Inc. project.
Sure. I grew up on a farm in Iowa. I'm a fifth generation farm boy. So that's kind of my ag side of things. And then I've been inventing, taking products to the marketplace for almost 3 decades. And so I've done consumer products. I've done, internet related stuff, document imaging. And a few years ago, I came across the patent from the University of Illinois, which we later trademarked Corn Board, which was taking the leftover husk and leaves out of the cornfield and pressing it into a structural board. But when I optioned that patent, they had no recipe, they had no board or sample. So I had to go figure that out. So I kind of went around the country for a year and figured out I think I could make this board. And then I licensed it. Later on, I filed more IP, created my own R&D facility, and we started putting it in skateboards, cores of skis, and snowboards while we're trying to really figure it out. Ultimately getting to pallets, of which we started testing pallets. We went through Virginia Tech for all their testing, and then we've been doing corporate testing. One of those facilities is Frito-Lay, and we've developed what we believe is a competitive board to traditional wood pallets. And so that's kind of the high level version of everything that where we ended up, and just a lot of interesting things we've developed along the way.
There's so many things in there that are interesting to me and I think will be interesting to hear about. But we could talk about some general things about your approach to business and leadership first, or we could hear more, since you've had that introduction, about what you're looking for and from investors.
Well, I think that's a good question about, what drives you, or how do you look at entrepreneurship, or how do you look at inventing? And I think maybe that's a good place to start.
Let's start with it then. Yeah.
So, I think there's probably, obviously your values and what you want to pursue and what you're passionate about are really important. But I think there's a couple core things that I think are really important, and that's a good work ethic and a great attitude. And those things will be the things you need to persistently push through. And so persistence to me is one of the most untapped, advantages that people have. And I think that, persistence is something that you may not have as much talent as somebody else. We see this in sports a lot, or other areas where people don't have near the advantage, but they're more persistent. And they ultimately seem to rise above or equal to some of the greatest talent, or, smarts or whatever. And I see, persistence is something we all can have. So I think as looking at my past career, I think, sometimes it's easy to go, wow, this looks too challenging, or there's, things that are above your skill set or above your knowledge. And persistence, you kind of figure those things out and weather through. So that's kind of, what I'd call some of my foundation. Growing up on a farm, you've got to learn to fix things. You got to learn to make things work, and constantly dealing with unknowns, whether it be the weather, you can't control that, a piece of equipment that breaks, or you got an animal that doesn't want to do what you want it to do. I think those things are the things that were kind of built into me. I was always kind of curious about things. My dad was probably more engineer than I am, but I've learned to kind of be an engineer along the way. So I think that's some of the core things that I think make a big difference for, people that are going to be either inventing or entrepreneuring, some of those things. So, and we can dive into some of those a little deeper if you want.
Roland, this is the first time we've had someone who's identified as an inventor. And I would love to hear a little bit more about what that means to you, and what your journey's been, just from the perspective of it being an inventor, because this is something that's so critical in our economy as a whole, but also specifically in the area of private investing, right? Because this is exactly the kind of system that we have. Small things get invented and turn into big things, and there's somebody who's an inventor, or a team of people who are inventing behind that. And so I'd love to hear more about that, Lane.
Well, I didn't set out to be an inventor. My first invention was called the CD poster, and I ultimately won the first TV invention show on the Montel Williams with that. And I didn't really know anything about it. I had an idea. I was inspired by my stepson laying out all his music CDs on the carpet. And I was like, wow, if you could hang that on the wall, that'd be like really cool. And so that's kind of where it started. And I started trying to figure out, plastics. I didn't know anything about plastics, and ultimately led to a patent and selling that product in retail. But it was one of those things that you just kind of, I don't know how I say this, but it's like you're too dumb to know that it is, maybe there's more challenges out there. And so what I found was you just kind of just focus micro on what you need to do today. And that's kind of where that journey started. And I felt like I got pretty good at the IP side of things, patents, and discovering, how to make something unique there and get it protected. And, you kind of hang your hat on the patent, and then you realize later down the road that, maybe a single patent is not what you want to hang your hat on, but it's a key component to protecting your technology. You may have trade secrets, you may have other things that are involved in that. And then I went into some document imaging, some internet IP. I sold the IP for some internet technology. And that was kind of a quick and dirty. I wasn't too excited about it, but I knew there was some IP to be had. But document imaging, we did something really unique there, sold that to Newell Rubbermaid, and, kind of laid the groundwork for just being able to work through a process where you can take an idea, something from a napkin, and start to put structure around it, and where you can go, okay, what's my next step? What's the big picture look like? How do I back into that? I think a lot of, from an inventing standpoint, is a lot of reverse engineering. Okay, what's the end goal? How do we work back from there? And sometimes it's just not a single product. It's your design around that product. How do you take it to market? There's so many strategies. You've got to kind of be able to either, bring talent to the table, whether it be, the engineering or the inventing side, the production side, which is a whole different, typically talent than marketing and sales and getting a product in the marketplace. My background, I was in customer service, and working in hotels and airlines. So I knew a lot about interacting with people and kind of the sales aspect. Some of that kind of came natural to me. So when it came to moving a product, I was pretty persistent. One of the things, and I probably framed it somewhere, but with the CD poster, I got a very nice letter from Michael's, the store that has all the crafts. Kind of, we were not interested in your product at all. And then I have next to that, my first big purchase order of $50,000 worth of CD posters to Michael's. So it was kind of like sometimes no is not really a no right now. It's just maybe you're not talking to the right buyer, or you're not, the timing's not right. And that kind of taught me is, you need to just continue to be persistent again. And so anyhow, that's kind of some of the thoughts on that.
Well, Lena, you're a perfect example of why I really enjoy what I do. And I think Sarah and I know each other well enough that I think she shares this sentiment. But we wind up as attorneys working with people like you who exhibit all these incredibly positive traits. Creativity is the first one that comes to mind. And you mentioned persistence, attitude. I've learned a lot about attitude. I like the idea that things start to change when you change the way that you look at them. So I really love all of that story, and then this inventor concept, and you mentioned the patents. That is something that can create value for a company, having this sort of protected enclave where people can't come in and encroach on that. And it does maybe only buy you a lawsuit if somebody is trying to compete with you, but it does enhance the value of what it is that you're doing. This very simple concept of the corn stover to a wood alternative, but there's a technology component to that's really critical. So, I love all of that. And, I'm just really interested in hearing, about, I guess we heard about it a little bit last night, but could you just describe the process, the manufacturing process, how you turn the corn stover, maybe describe the stover? I think it's pretty obvious, but maybe it isn't obvious to everybody. But how does that turn into the wood alternative?
Again, great question. And, a lot of people have never heard stover, and I grew up on a farm and didn't hear stover. So, it's basically the husk leaves, cob, and stalk, and it's left in the field after they combine, take out the corn kernel, which we know is used for, hundreds of applications. So, yield of the corn and yield, in terms of pounds of the stover in the field go up together. So for every pound or every bushel of corn that you harvest, there's 56 pounds of stover left in the field. So if you have, 100 bushels, you get 5,000 plus, 600 pounds of stover. Average yield in America is around 200 bushels, give or take. So you were looking at 10,000 pounds of stover per acre. So if you take that leftover stover and we remove about 20%, we bale right behind the combine in those big round bales you see with a John Deere type baler. And then we take those out of the field, and then we separate the husk and leaves from the cob and stalk. And then we mix about 8% binder with the husk and leaves, and then we press that under pressure, pulling vacuum, and then we use heat as well. And that's kind of our secret sauce, if you will, our recipe on how we do it. So we can do different thicknesses, different densities. And again, it's about engineering the board based on the application. A door core may need a different density than flooring. And that's kind of how we've ultimately looked at the marketplace is instead of just trying to go to Home Depot and compete, we decided let's go specific to industries. If we're making a pallet, let's make a pallet that is best, with the right amount of density and structural integrity to be able to withstand what a pallet goes through. So that's kind of our process. Obviously we've had our challenges along the way. There was some density, barriers that we had to break through to ultimately make a really competitive product with pressed engineered wood. And that'd be, OSB, MDF, particle board, plywoods. And based on what we can produce, we can compete with each one of those specifically. And right now with Frito-Lay, they use a plywood flatboard to move their chips around. And we're competing with that flatboard piece of plywood with our corn board.
So I have a couple questions, but one is you also mentioned last night that there's a return to the farmers. And so that what you're doing, I mean, it's obvious that there's a huge amount of waste that's now being reused or incorporated into the economy. And you told me about it in technical terms about carbon capture and things like that. So I'd love to hear more about that. And also maybe the economics of it. Like, the fact that there's a return going to farmers, which is, I've heard the term circular economy in other contexts, but the basic idea is that everything that is involved in your production, you get to capture an economic value from it, which also has a benefit in terms of not wasting, things and adding extra, maybe unused things into our environment. So do you want to speak more about that?
Yes, I think there's, we didn't necessarily go with the motivation to be, this checklist of really environmentally good things for everybody. That kind of came as we were figuring this out. But, when we remove some of that stover from the field, it does have a little bit of a nutrient value. It also helps the farmer leaving some of that in the field for wind or water erosion. But for the most part, there's more stover in that field than they really need. And so by removing some of that, there's a couple things that happen. If they have some sort of fungus or mold or some sort of pest related, by removing a portion of that, they just got rid of it without having to use pesticides or herbicides or those types of things. So that's kind of a good thing long-term for farmers from a benefit standpoint. They get a check they don't normally get. It's not a huge check, but it's, they could help put their kids through college or buy a pickup at an earlier time than they normally would. And then, we separate the husk and leaves from the cob and stalk. So when we press the husk and leaves into a board, we sequester CO2. And it's roughly 40% by weight is sequestered CO2. So there's a benefit there. And then the cob and stalk, we actually have a process. It's not our process, but where we turn it into biochar. And that biochar sequesters CO2. And then we put that back on the farmer's field, helping with soil health. And with microbial health, that's kind of a new term in the present, few years about how important, soil health is. So we're adding to that. There's studies show that it helps retain nitrogen, maybe some moisture things, not necessarily big for like more yield, but I think long-term soil health is a really good thing in relation to that. So that's kind of the benefit to the farmer. So we believe we are doing a positive thing. We've done our own studies. What we've seen by removing some of that stover allows them to get in there and do a cover crop much easier. And then in the spring, they can go no-till, which also, when you're not tilling the soil, it's not giving off CO2 into the atmosphere. So that's another positive thing. And we found that the soil temperatures seem to warm up a little more in the spring, so they could get their crop in a little earlier. And those roots get a little deeper when they go into something maybe more of the drier time of year. And they're seeing some gain on that from a yield standpoint. So I think we're impacting them in a positive way related to what we're doing with the farmer. So that's a really important relationship to us is that, and having grown up on a farm, we really wanted to be able to help farmers. And we also wanted to have a really close relationship in terms to our feedstock. And then obviously we can put these plants that manufacture corn board in rural towns in America. So American manufacturing, jobs in rural America, all those opportunities we think are really good. And then at the end of the day, obviously we don't cut down a tree. And I think that's a really good thing in a lot of ways. I'm not anti-lumber. I'm just saying if we're going to cut down a tree, let's make a house that lasts 100 years, not a pallet that goes on one trip and ends in a landfill. So we've kind of created from the standpoint with the farmer, but also with how we manufacture and we lease the pallets so we can reclaim them and repurpose them, either grind them up and make more corn board or be able to make another product with it. So what we want to do is also keep things out of landfill and help the customer and save them money. And by a lease program, we can usually typically find a way to save them, capital. And again, a lot of companies are buying pallets, they're managing pallets. That's not their business. It's just part of what they do. So if we can help them there, again, another great relationship on the consumer side. So I didn't mean to ramble, but that's kind of
that was not a ramble. That was great information. Roland, did you have something to add? Because I have a couple of questions too.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I mean, where I was going, I wanted to hear this, getting into the pallet discussion, but Sarah, go ahead and
just before we do that, because I just want to make an observation really, and that is that, we talk about win-win a lot on this webcast because I think, speaking for Roland also, we both really believe that the best outcomes for people also in lots of contexts is when everybody feels like they've won something. Maybe not everything you wanted, but and it sounds like what you've designed is a win-win throughout the supply chain where you get your raw materials. There's a win-win, a measurable win-win there for a farmer. Then you're talking about going into the smaller communities. There's a win-win there because, we need jobs in those smaller communities that otherwise everybody has to migrate to the cities. And that's a worldwide problem, really, that migration from rural to urban areas, and it creates issues. And then you're talking about the win-win on the customer side and into your sales channels. And I think that's what we're about to talk about a little bit more. This whole idea of leasing something like a pallet. It's not something I would have automatically thought about, but it makes a lot of sense from what you've mentioned.
Yeah, let's speak to leasing pallets because it is a model that exists. Probably 10% of total pallets are in a lease program. Most of those are a typical block pallet or a stringer type pallet. A lot of it's in the food industry. If you go to Costco or Sam's, you'll see the blue pallet or the red pallet, and those are typically in a lease program. 93% of all pallets in the U.S. are a wood pallet. So, and there's 500 million new pallets going into the market every year, and they estimate there's over 2 billion just in the United States. So, to give you some context to that, a lot of the lower end pallets, maybe let's say take 30%, are what we call low quality, low grade pallet, and they don't last that long. And they blow through them. They go on one trip. A lot end up in landfill. They recycle what they can, and what we think is that there's a real great market to convert that low quality pallet that people are using, which is really not that cheap because they keep buying them and keep using them, and get them into a lease program where they're not having to keep buying pallets. They just come up with a monthly fee and we can save them money. And so we feel there's a real big model and a need for that, especially in warehouse and distribution, because these pallets aren't going all over the country necessarily. They're moving their goods within their facility, similar to what Frito-Lay is doing and some of the other companies that are either manufacturing. And how do we help them, and when wood pallets, damage, they split, they splinter, they leave all kinds of stuff everywhere. Ours won't split like wood. So we don't leave as much stuff in their facilities. So from that standpoint, we think there's a huge model there. And then from a long-term contract standpoint, lumber is very volatile. It's going up and down. There's a lot of different factors. Now we got tariffs that we're talking about, and everybody's going to, where's that going to end up in terms of cost? But lumber is, continually gone up. It's continually been more volatile. And, with beetle kill, with, forest fires, and, even some of the foresting that is being what we call farmed, or, what I mean, from a standpoint, the quality of that is not as good as it used to be. And so there's some challenges there related to, the quality, the volume. And, with our farmer relationship, we can have a pricing fix with farmers or a slight increase, and over time have long-term contracts with the consumer. So we think we have a really competitive product because of that. And it's just one of those things out there. There's no competition, for a lumber type pallet. It dominates the market. There's plastic out there, and most of those are in the lease program. They're expensive to make, but they last a long time. That's the good part. But at the end of the day, it's plastic, and a lot of people don't like that, So I've seen a lot of the, people lobbing bombs from the wood side to the plastic to the wood,
Right.
and all those things. And we just kind of slide in between both of them going, hey, we think we got something that makes a difference for everybody. So,
Yeah.
and the stover is a leftover, byproduct that's what we call underutilized. I wouldn't call it waste because it does have a value. But just the U.S., which is 40% of the global production of corn, if you took all the fields at the end of harvest and baled up all that stover and put it in 1,000-pound round bales and put them end to end, it'd go around the earth 21 times. So it's the largest biomass on planet Earth, readily available as a byproduct. So and structural integrity that we get out of corn stover is pretty impressive. So we found this great feedstock that we think that we can manage from a price standpoint and be consistent onto the consumer. So those are the things we kind of fell on as we were figuring this out that would be beneficial to us. When I started this, I didn't think maybe tariffs would drive our business through the roof or not. And, who knows where those are going to land. People ask me all the time, is that a good thing, a bad thing? And I'm kind of like, well, I don't know, but we're made in the U.S. and we think we can add value to what customers are doing. So.
Right. I think that's just wonderful personally. Roland, you had something you were going to say?
Well, no, yeah, it's just a really positive story. And that's why, it's fun for us to bring on companies, the leadership of companies like you that are working on something that you can really feel good about adding value all around and, encouraging thinking about soil health. Maybe the farmers haven't thought about that as much before, but you're encouraging them to improve their process. So this is super positive, Lane. I'm really enjoying hearing and learning more about corn board.
I have one random question, Lane. What does corn board smell like?
That's a good question. Baked chocolate chip cookies. No,
great. It's even better.
It does smell somewhat like a baked, not necessarily like a bread or anything, but it has a nice smell to it, so it's not a bad smell. That probably is a question you should ask my wife. She's got the smeller.
No, it's just funny because I used to go to a lot of wood stores with my dad, who's an amateur carpenter, and I remember different wood. Wood has a certain distinct smell, and different woods even smell differently. And so, that's kind of interesting because that could actually be that would be the kind of thing that people using them, like with their forklift, shifting stuff around would notice, right?
Yeah, essentially press it under heat and pressure, you're going to have more of a baked smell.
Cooked corn.
Versus wood, has a great smell, raw wood, because it's just a natural product. So.
Yeah. I guess too, just down that vein, sawdust and all those types of things can give people problems, workers and the people who are using pallets. It sounds like from your product, that wouldn't be there. You don't have a dust or
I shouldn't say you don't have a dust because when you cut it with typical, saws and blades and stuff, you're breaking down a biomass that is creating smaller particles. So, I wouldn't say maybe the same dust, but it still creates something where you need, eye protection and breathing protection when you're cutting it and doing different things related to that. So.
I used to work for a business that had a large manufacturing facility, not manufacturing, but they had a large warehouse. A lot of pallets were involved. And I remember having to go in there sometimes and starting to sneeze and things like that just because I guess as pallets wear down because they're cheap, they add something into the environment that can cause you sort of an allergic reaction. Anyway, so Roland, do you want to, actually what we haven't talked about is specifically what you're looking for in terms of equity investment. We talk about a lot of commercial real estate here. And so those types of investment deals are fairly straightforward and familiar to people who are used to investing in 506c deals in commercial real estate. Yours is a private equity proposition, which is another kind of alternative asset to put it in the framework of our webcast. But specifically, what are you looking for right now?
So we built this company with kind of a long-term strategy. We knew we had a lot of things to develop. So it's my capital, friends and family. So we've kept it pretty small. We did recently, here a couple of years ago, have a key shareholder pass away, of which we purchased that stock back. And we're putting that back out on the market so we can get our capital and continue to do our R&D as we scale production for big customers. So we're kind of putting it out there at what it was bought back at. So it's kind of discounted, if you will. So it's a small amount, but it's significant to us in what we're doing. So kind of not that we're out there pushing stock all the time or anything like that. I think over the past, we maybe have 40 some shareholders, so we don't have very many. So that's what's available. And we can, if somebody's interested, we can get into more details and maybe if they're okay with an NDA. But, we just have that available, and we welcome some new people that would want to see us into the future and the opportunity and share that with us. And, maybe some of those could be somewhat strategic, those relationships, and as an investor, but anyhow, that's kind of what we're doing.
Let's talk about why an investment in corn board would be so excellent. Can we talk about the pallet arrangement? You mentioned it. I don't know how broadly you wanted to disseminate, but your customer relationships and the existing ones that you have now and the ones that you project out into the future. I think that would be an interesting thing. And when people hear about, what you had shared with us, that just, realizing that you just have such a clear path to revenue is going to make you even more attractive.
Yeah, that's a really good thing. Speaking of corn board, obviously there's lots of applications, building materials, and a lot of people, that's where their mind goes right away is, let's build a house. And there's more challenges to that. You're competing with very finicky price point. And if you build a house with corn board and it fails, it's called a lawsuit. If you make a pallet and it fails, you just replace it. So big difference. But our strategy and focus to go to pallets, we felt that was a low-hanging fruit. We have we've got a pretty long list of interested customers, and you'd recognize a lot of those names. Frito-Lay seemed to be a company we really wanted to focus on. It doesn't matter what the economy's doing. They seem to be always selling chips. So that was a good customer. They had this word. And we have an LOI with them for pretty much everything with scaled production that would go to them. So we really have micro-focused on a customer, which some people may say, well, you need lots of customers. What if they go away? Well, we got a pretty long list of potential really big name customers out there. And we feel what we can do for a customer and saving them money, it made the most sense to us to focus on Frito-Lay. And just a great company. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but their warehouse distribution is a closed loop system, so we don't have to track pallets all over the country. It stays within pretty much their facilities and moves their product around. So from that standpoint, it made a lot of sense. So
that's really a great market and opportunity, the market opportunity that you all have. And you mentioned it before, what you said, 2 billion pallets in the United States.
Yeah, 2+ billion. I don't know what the exact number is. I don't know if anybody really knows. I guess if you're counting that many pallets, by the time you get them done counted, there's a whole new set. But they estimate about 500 million pallets new in the marketplace every year. So that tells you what they're going through. If you do the numbers, it's a lot of pallets that are being used and and need to be replaced. So there's a huge market for making a pallet last longer and supplementing really the lumber side of it, since most of it's lumber. And I think there's probably, and this is me personally, but I think a lot of people would agree that there's a better use for lumber than maybe a pallet. Obviously, we need pallets. Everything moves on pallets. But if we could get a more competitive alternative product that's maybe more recyclable and comes from a source, I think that's good for the industry. I mean, just pallets and alone and the growth of that, we may be able to fill that gap. So we're not necessarily using more lumber. But I think that, repurposing that, I think that's a really positive thing.
Well, then next show, you're going to capture the pallet market, and then we're going to have you on with Tony Hawk so you can make some more skateboards. I like that idea too.
Well, yeah, I got something Tony Hawk and I are connected at the Smithsonian. We both have skateboards in the Smithsonian, so that's kind of a cool thing. I've not met Tony Hawk, but
well, that's really great. Well, Wayne, we are running up against, we try to keep these around, 30 to 45 minutes. We want to be really flexible. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you think is important that people should know about cornboard?
Well, that's a good question. I could talk for a long time, but specifically, I think we have something that's really going to be beneficial to the marketplace. And if we look at the farmer side, we look at manufacturing, I think as a society, especially if we're talking about America, we've lost some technology overseas. We've lost some things. We've given up manufacturing. And I think we're starting to see that's cost us more, and I think our innovation has kind of left some of that. And we talk about innovation and those things. I think it's really important that we got to go, okay, sometimes it's better to grow a tomato in your backyard than, import it halfway across the country. So I think, repurposing our thought process on how we consume, how we use our goods and more efficiently. And I think before we just run down to the store and buy whatever and never really thought about the process. And I think America's going, okay, maybe there's some better ways to do things and localize things more and get things more manufactured in the U.S., a shorter distance to the consumer. So I think, as we look at that, I think we fall into a category where we could help with that. So from a cornboard standpoint, we feel like we're part of the group that's going, okay, what's a better way to do this that benefits maybe not necessarily big corporate America and everybody has their hand in that cookie jar in terms of, from a manufacturer to consumer good, there may be a lot of people from retail and everything else. And maybe how do we put more of that revenue in the manufacturer and maybe give better savings to the consumer and create those wins. So we feel like we're probably, one of the ones that are trying to do something good for everybody.
Yeah, it sounds like it's me. So,
well, I guess that sounds like a good place to wrap up. And thank you for being with us today, Lane, and being a guest on Alt Investing Made Easy. We love to talk about these alternative investment opportunities. And like I said at the beginning, we wind up talking about commercial real estate a lot, but this is a perfect example of a private equity deal, an investment opportunity for the right person. It's a little different from the offerings that we typically try to help our clients sell, in the sense that this isn't a new issue. It's cashing out an existing shareholder. But I think that cornboard is going to be continuing to be active in the marketplace, continuing to expand, maybe continuing to expand into selling more and more pallets every year, but maybe some other segment of the market. There are lots of things that are made from wood and wood alternative, and this is just such a great idea. I think you're going to have a great success, Lane. And so just once again, thank you for being a guest on Alt Investing Made Easy.
Well, thanks for having me, and look forward to maybe having a conversation down the road when we get to building materials, and then our real estate people are going to get really excited about that.
Well, yeah,
that's
exactly.
a great idea.
That's right.
That is a great idea. So, Lane, really thank you for joining us today, and we'll look forward to further conversations with you. And to everyone watching, thank you for joining us today on Alt Investing Made Easy. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe to our channel.
And remember, everyone, take aim with your alternative investing strategies.
See you next time.